In a quiet town, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of city life, lived a woman named Sara. She was known for her kindness, always ready to lend a helping hand to her neighbors. But behind her warm smile, Sara carried a heavy burden, a past that haunted her. It nibbled away at her peace, making her constantly look over her shoulder, afraid of what lurked in the shadows. Sara had always dreamed of a love that would light up her life. She longed for someone who would understand her, someone who would see the real her beneath the surface. Then came David, a man whose charm swept her off her feet. He was charismatic and attentive, the kind of person who made you feel like you were the only one that mattered. They met at a local coffee shop, where their chemistry ignited like a spark. At first, their relationship blossomed. They shared long walks, deep conversations, and laughter that made her forget her worries. But as months passed, cracks started to form in their seemingly perfect romance. David's sweet words began to twist into strings of control. He wanted to know where she was at all times, who she was with, and why she smiled at strangers. Sara tried to brush it off, convincing herself it was just his way of showing love. One evening, they were out with friends at a cozy restaurant when David's temper flared. Sara laughed at a joke from a friend, and she immediately felt David's icy gaze on her. The warmth in her chest turned cold. It was as if a dark cloud had cast a shadow over their night. After the friends left, David pulled her aside, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Are you trying to embarrass me?" he hissed, a storm brewing in his eyes. Sara felt her heart race, but she didn't want to believe he was serious. The tension continued to build. Every time Sara made a mistake, no matter how small, David became harsh and critical. She found herself tiptoeing around him, hoping to avoid an argument. One night, Sara forgot to text him that she would be late getting home from work. When she walked through the door, he was waiting for her, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "You think you can just do whatever you want?" he snapped. That was the moment she felt her heart sink. Love was supposed to feel safe and warm, not like walking through a minefield. As the weeks slipped by, Sara became more isolated. Her friends noticed her absence at gatherings and parties, but every time they asked if she was okay, she would force a smile and assure them she was fine. It was easier than admitting the truth. She believed David had her best interests at heart, but deep down, she was terrified of upsetting him. The fear began to drain the joy from her life, like water from a cracked pitcher. Then came the night that shattered everything. They were at home, sitting on the couch, when Sara's phone buzzed. It was a message from a longtime friend, inviting her to a birthday party. She felt excitement bubbling within her. "Can I go?" she asked David, her voice trembling with hope. But David's face twisted in anger. "You're not going anywhere without me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Sara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't dare argue. That night, she sat in silence, her heart heavy with regret. All she wanted was to celebrate with her friends, to feel free again. But instead, she felt trapped. The walls of their apartment closed in on her, suffocating her spirit. Sara spent more time hiding her feelings, burying them deep inside. Days turned into weeks, and the fear tightened its grip even more. One night, David didn't come home. Panic seized Sara as she wondered if he was safe. Hours passed, and finally her phone rang. David was on the line, his voice slurred and angry. He accused her of cheating, of being untrustworthy. It was an explosion she could never have prepared for. One night, after a particularly tense day at work, Sara returned home to an empty apartment. She felt a fleeting glimpse of hope. Maybe this was the night she could gather her thoughts without fear. But then, the door swung open and David stormed in. His face was etched with rage. "Where have you been?" he demanded, making her heart race. "I was with friends," she said, trying to sound calm, though inside, panic roared like a thunderstorm. The argument escalated rapidly. Words exchanged like daggers, and Sara felt herself drowning beneath a tide of fear. His face twisted in anger, and she stepped back, her back hitting the wall. she realized she needed to either take a stand now or risk losing her chance at freedom forever. That night was a turning point. After David stormed off to the bedroom, Sara felt a rush of adrenaline. She grabbed her phone and texted her closest friend, asking for help. They arranged to meet at a safe spot where David wouldn't find her, and her heart raced at the thought of finally leaving him behind. The following day, she gathered her belongings while David was at work. She felt fragile, like a delicate glass sculpture being chipped away, but determination fueled her every move. She couldn't ignore the need for freedom any longer. It was about survival now. When the day of her escape arrived, Sara's heart pounded in her chest. She met her friend at the designated spot, adrenaline coursing through her veins. As they drove away, she felt a mix of fear and relief wash over her. Was this really happening? Was she finally free? Leaving David behind felt like stepping out of a dark tunnel into the light. But the weeks that followed were not without struggle. As she began to settle into her new life, the echoes of David's anger haunted her. She found herself looking over her shoulder, convinced that he might come looking for her. She changed her phone number, cut ties with old mutual friends, and blocked him on social media. But still, the fear lingered. That night, Sara couldn't sleep. She lay awake, replaying his angry words in her mind, wondering if he would escalate things if he found her again. The fear settled in her bones as she remembered all the times his anger had turned violent. How could she truly feel safe when he was still out there? Determined to regain control, Sara began attending support groups for domestic abuse survivors. It was there that she finally found her voice, listening to other women share their stories. Together, they created a community of strength and empowerment. She no longer felt alone in her experiences. Each story was a reminder that they were not defined by their pasts, but by their resilience. How could someone who claimed to love her turn so quickly into someone she feared? The following day, a shadow of fear loomed over every interaction. When David returned, he was different. Cold, quiet, and unapproachable, he barely acknowledged her. Sara felt the walls closing in further. It was as if she was a ghost in her own home. One day, she decided enough was enough. It was time for her to break free. She reached out to her friends, hesitating only briefly before inviting them over. It was a small gathering at first, just tea and cookies, but as the evening wore on, it turned into a confession. She poured out her heart, revealing her struggles. The support she found in their eyes flickered hope inside of her like a match struck in the dark. Zrenia. Her friends listened, their expressions shifting from concern to determination. "You have to stand up for yourself, Sara. You deserve better," one of them said. That night, Sara felt a flicker of courage growing within her. It was time to reclaim her life. However, as she planned her escape, David sensed a change in her. He could feel the distance growing between them, and his temper flared even more. There were nights when she would come home, and he would wait for her, anger simmering just below the surface, ready to boil over. She feared what he might do if he found out she planned to leave. One evening, Sara was out with her friends when she saw a familiar figure across the street. Her heart dropped as the realization hit her. David was standing there watching her. Panic surged through her. She felt like a deer caught in headlights. Her friends quickly noticed her distress and ushered her away, but the encounter rattled her to her core. As the months went by, Sara grew stronger. She learned to assert herself, finding empowerment in her own voice. One day, while sharing her story, she saw someone in the room whose face mirrored the pain she once felt. They locked eyes, and in that moment, Sara realized her strength wasn't just for herself, but for others who needed hope. One evening, during a support group meeting, a new member sat quietly in the corner. Her name was Mia. She was a gentle soul with a shy demeanor, but Sara could sense the weight on her shoulders. After the meeting, Sara reached out, inviting Mia for coffee. As they sat together, Mia began to share her story, her voice barely a whisper. Mia had experienced the same manipulation Sara once endured. Each word she spoke chipped away at the layers of strength Sara had been building, but instead of crumbling, she stood firm. "You are not alone," she reassured her softly. "There is a way out. Let me help you." Their friendship blossomed over those coffee dates, and soon they were inseparable. They confided in each other, shared their fears, and celebrated their victories. One day, while on a walk together, Mia turned to Sara, her eyes shimmering with resolve. "I think it's time I leave too. You've shown me what is possible." Sara felt a swell of pride and support for her friend. It was like watching a flower bloom in the sunlight after a long winter. They decided to go through the process together. The planning, the packing, the strength it takes to leave a life of fear behind. But as they prepared to break free from the chains of their past, the shadows loomed. One afternoon, while Sara was at work, Mia called her in a panic. "He's been texting me. I feel like he knows something," she gasped, breathless and frantic. The world around Sara blurred as her heart raced. They had taken precautions, but their abusers often had a way of finding them. Anxiety clawed at her, but she quickly switched gears, calming Mia. "We'll figure this out. You're not facing this alone." They devised a plan. They would meet at a safe location and alert their support group, ensuring they had eyes on Mia. As the sun set that evening, Sara stood outside, anxiety trembling in her chest. She felt the weight of her past mixing with the fear for her friend's safety. Just as darkness fell, Mia arrived, her face pale, fear etched deep in her features. "I think I saw him. I think he was following me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Together, they decided to go into hiding for a few days until they could assess the situation. Sara felt the flood of emotions swirling inside her. They had fought so hard to reclaim their lives, and now the threat loomed once more. The following days were tense, filled with whispers and quick glances over their shoulders. But together, they fortified each other's spirits. They reached out to the support group, who provided resources and connections to legal assistance. Slowly but surely, they began to feel safe again, knowing they had a community rallying behind them. One day, during a session, a counselor shared a powerful message about healing and resilience. "You are not defined by your past, but by your courage to reclaim your future," she said, looking directly at Sara and Mia. In that moment, Sara felt the burden of fear lift just a little more. As summer rolled in, Sara and Mia's friendship deepened. They became each other's confidants, sharing laughter and tears. They vented their frustrations and celebrated their victories, whether big or small. With each passing day, they took steps toward liberation, finding security in their newfound courage. But the shadows still hovered. One night, Sara received an unexpected text from David, one that sent chills down her spine. "I know where you are," it read, cold and menacing. Panic flared in her chest, but she quickly reminded herself of how far she had come. She immediately called Mia, not knowing how to internalize the threat. Together, they went back to the support group, where Sara laid bare her fears. As she spoke, she felt an overwhelming sense of solidarity with the women around her. Voices rose in support, and they brainstormed ways to protect her. Safety plans, documentation, and potentially involving law enforcement if it came to that. The weeks turned into a blur of action as they implemented their safety plan. They reported the threats to the police, and although it felt daunting, they were no longer alone. They were empowered, determined to take back control of their lives and their futures. Over time, Sara found herself slowly healing. She began painting again, a passion she had set aside for far too long. With every stroke of the brush, she poured her pain onto the canvas, transforming her anguish into something beautiful. It was therapeutic, a way for her to express what words couldn't capture. As the seasons changed, so did Sara. Her vibrant colors on canvas mirrored her internal transformation, a shift from darkness to light, from fear to empowerment. One day, while painting the sunset, she realized she was finally ready to embrace her life without shadows. The past would always be a part of her story, but it no longer held her hostage. One afternoon, as she met Mia for coffee in their favorite spot, Sara felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They laughed about the silly things, their first attempts at self-defense, and the odd lessons they picked up from online tutorials. Mia looked at her, a glimmer of hope lighting her face. "We've come so far together," she said, and Sara nodded in agreement. With each conversation, each shared smile, Sara realized just how powerful it is to reclaim one's life. They had transformed into allies, warriors standing together against the darkness. It felt liberating. As time went on, they decided to organize a community gathering, their way of raising awareness and creating a safe space for dialogue. They wanted others who had hidden in silence for too long to speak up and share their stories of resilience. It was time to shine a light on the shadows and create a ripple of support. And so, they began planning. They reached out to local organizations and rallied support from the community. On the day of the gathering, the air buzzed with energy. Women from all walks of life, some carrying scars just like theirs, came together to stand in solidarity. As they shared their stories, Sara realized that through her pain, she had found purpose. Each woman who spoke resonated with the weight of their struggles, but also the spark of hope they carried within. Together, they painted a vivid picture of survival, a reminder that while the past may linger, the future holds endless possibilities. When it was her turn to speak, Sara felt the familiar pang of nerves but embraced it. We are the authors of our own stories. No one can take that power away from us, she declared, her voice steady. The applause that followed reverberated through her heart, reminding her of how far she had come. At the end of the day, Sara stood with Mia and their friends, all of them tired but alive in a way they hadn't felt in a long time. As they packed up, Sara gazed at the vibrant sunset, radiant against the horizon. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. The shadows of her past would always be a part of her story, but they no longer threatened to snuff out her light. She knew that moving forward would continue to require courage, but now she had the love and support of a community behind her. Together, they faced the future, hand in hand, determined to rise against all odds and ready to embrace the beauty of life that lay ahead. Finally, as Sara looked out over the horizon, she realized this was not the end, but a new beginning, a journey of empowerment, friendship, and hope that would continue to unfold. She would carry her scars with pride, remembering the storm she had weathered, but also the strength she had discovered within herself to rise again. And so, with a heart filled with hope, Sara stepped forward into the light, ready for whatever came next, knowing she was never alone.